call the meeting to order, and let's stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, item 2 on our agenda is public delegations. This is the public's opportunity to address the committee. Is there anyone from the public who would like to say a few words? Anybody?
I would like to go, please.
Oh, sure. And you just identify yourself.
Yes.
You probably, this should work. So come on, maybe a tad closer here and identify yourself and address. You can still sit. Let's just be a little closer to our recording device. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Ad Hoc Committee. As you know, I'm Attorney Tristan Winkler, and I stand here, or sit here once again, in defense and in support of short-term rentals.
Excuse me, sir. Your address.
10 Vermont Drive, Oakdale, Connecticut, 06370. Just wanted to take a couple minutes to respond to the discussions held at the last hearing. It has been suggested that short-term rentals do not bring tourists to East Lyme. However, this assertion is far from accurate. Observing the summer months, it is undeniable that thousands of tourists flood Niantic and the nearby beaches. These visitors explore the area, dine at local restaurants, and fill the shorelines. Short-term rentals contribute significantly to this surge of tourism. If these visitors are forced to rent in locations like New London or Mystic, it is highly unlikely that they would regularly venture to East Lyme. Moreover, comparing short-term rentals to hotels is simply erroneous. Hotels operate with expansive parking lots, often bustling with constant car movement. They boast large lobbies, bars, restaurants, and a full complement of staff, including cooks, bartenders, and wait staff. In contrast, private short-term rental homes provide a different, more quieter experience, more private experience. Guests manage their stays adhering to house rules that prohibit loud parties, excessive noise, and public disturbances. This ensures a respectful integration into the community without the commercial hustle and bustle that is inherent to hotels. Short-term rentals also play a critical role in East Lyme's tourism economy in bringing visitors who genuinely appreciate the town's charm. Their presence supports local businesses, promotes community-driven tourism, and sustains the unique character of the area. This emphasizes the distinct advantages and community benefits of short-term rentals compared to traditional hotels, and also highlights why they are different. I just want to emphasize once again that I understand that each community member has their own personal opinion and bias, but I want to emphasize that any measures of community aiming to preclude or unreasonably restrict short-term rentals will certainly face significant legal action, especially in light of the Lyme decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who'd like to address us at this time? Okay. If not, we'll move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is approval of our minutes of the regular meeting of October 21st, 2024. I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Oh, second. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion about corrections, issues?
Nope. No, good.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions rather? Okay. Very good. So we're on to item 4 on the agenda, which is reports of co-chairs. Gary, do you have anything that you would like to?
No, I thought you were going to be good with the witty supplemental.
I know.
This is interesting.
So I know, and then you can just jump in there too.
Sure.
I just and for the public's benefit as well. So this is a filing of a supplemental memorandum of decision in the matter of Wibby. Of course, not to do with the Supreme Court. That decision was rendered. This is the Zoning Board of Appeals of the Pine Orchards Association. So, as you remember in reading the decision, when you're reading the appellate decision and the Supreme Court decision, there was this sort of remand that had to take place, that this case had to go back and deal with the issue of pre-existing non-conforming use. And so interestingly, it goes back. You sort of wonder what would have happened if this decision had been rendered sooner, and would we have, gone all the way up to the Supreme Court in the way that did transpire. But this is very interesting because Mr. Whibby was found not to fulfill the requirements for pre-existing non-conforming use under the 2019 regulations of that Branford Pine Orchards Beach Association. And much of the decision centered around the use as a single-family dwelling, and got pretty definitional, as did the Supreme Court case. So just wanted to give you the heads up about this. I really thank Mr. Mulholland for forwarding this through the attorneys in Noank, actually John Casey that's up there, who keeps up with the decision, with the Whibby matter. This came to my email, so I shared it with you all. But it is interesting because it's almost as if the Supreme Court case didn't happen. The thing that's very, and who knows, this could be appealed subsequently. Right. So we may go around and around and around. The thing that's very interesting is that I noticed was the media account of Mr. Whibby's use of the property there. Pretty much, and I don't know how accurate they are, but they characterized his use of the property, more as party house. Like it would attract the bachelor parties, this kind of thing. It's a big Victorian, from what I understand. So in any event, but so it seems as though he didn't meet the definition under those then existing those regulations. So just keep it in, it should go in your gray matter. It's just another, and they seem very unfazed by what happened at the Supreme Court too.
Right.
What do you think, Gary?
I mean, I didn't read it again today.
Yeah,
I read it when
it
you first gave it to me.
Right.
I think the interesting part was that if I recall correctly, they focused on he didn't prove it that he rented it to families, to one family.
Yes, single-family use.
Right, so I think that was a big problem, just a proof on his part.
Yes.
Everyone's different, though.
Yes, and the definition of family under the regulations in question was limited. It was blood, marriage, or adoption. So it didn't allow for non-related folks. So there you have it. I think the reason for this, in large part for this stuff. But it's a good analysis of. I think of a good example, I should say, rather, a good example of how you have to sometimes go through this analysis of pre-existing non-conforming uses. But again, limited language there.
Paul?
Yeah.
Thank you. The decision by the Supreme Court didn't seem to opine on a single family, but more on the right to rent your property, whereas the association, Pine Orchards, one of their requirements was that it be rented to a single family. And this indicates that Mr. Whibby did not prove that he rented to a single family on a single occasion or multiple occasions. Had he done that, he might have been okay. Even on that one time where they referenced an August 17 or 18 stay by a single family. If he had said that, he would have found himself in compliance.
Right.
So if this is kind of an apples to orange opinion to the Supreme Court, because they didn't really speak to the single family issue.
The appellate court seemed to really stress the single family use of the property. And they really spent a lot of time, again, I haven't read that decision in a while, they seem to spend quite a bit of time on single family use of the property. I just don't remember how much time they spent talking about the family unit themselves, a little bit. But they did give Whibby, this zoning board did give him an opportunity to come back and offer more proof with respect to whether he rented to families, and he just didn't produce any more proof for whatever reason. I think one of the reasons, now that I remember, he just wasn't asking people if they were in a family, because why would someone do that? I've never been asked when we rent a place.
So just keeping it in your mind as
Right.
as the fate of Mr. Whitty. We'll see what happens. But as Attorney DeMarca has told us, he also thinks that Whitty will be kind of challenged as we go forward in a number of ways, and so this potentially could be the beginning of it. I don't know. But that's all I have for reports right now. So we'll move on to item 5, which is a discussion of our answers to questions posed. So again, these are drafts and things like that, but for this meeting, Gary and I, as co-chairs, thought it would be very good to go back and at least answer that sort of fundamental question that we seem to address, but maybe not fully. That threshold question of the desirability of short-term rentals in East Lyme. And so 2 questions were asked, the first being, in this memo to you all as members, what is the most compelling evidence the committee's gathered, apart from your personal experiences, to support allowing short-term rentals in East Lyme? This is a broad question. This means all of East Lyme, okay? And the second question, what's the most compelling evidence this committee has gathered, apart from your personal experiences, to ban short-term rentals and to allow only longer-term rentals, that is greater than 30 days? So just trying to, not advocate for something, play devil's advocate, however you want to look at it, but just to kind of get us back to the evidence. I think a little concern that we had, because, it's a difficult task we have, is that we were aiming for resolution and recommendations and putting our energies there a lot and not backing up enough and asking those evidentiary questions that we need to ask. So that was the assignment, and everyone again did this individually, so we weren't sharing answers. So how do we want to do this, Gary, in terms of getting the discussion going on each of the questions?
Let's start with Ann's because she's not here.
Okay.
It's a risk you take.
Start with Ann Thurlow's response.
She hands up, Ann?
Yeah.
Say,
Okay.
yes.
In the packet.
Oh,
It's in the packet,
Page 2.
and because she was going to be away, did provide it. So
It's page, did you get a packet?
No.
Right here.
yes,
Page
Oh,
3.
I'm sorry. I didn't see it.
This is just everything from the email. Page 3.
Thank you.
Sure.
it's so brief, I think I'll just read it.
Sure.
So,
Do you have an extra copy?
You can take mine.
Thank you.
okay. So this is from Ann Thurlow, and she says, a large portion of the testimony we have heard came from short-term rental owners, who of course support allowing them for the rental income. The fact that their business is good tells us there is a demand for STRs. There's also been a long history of homes or rooms being rented near the beaches in the summertime. There was also testimony from some who do not want and do not allow short-term rentals in their residential neighborhood, Pine Grove, for example. Others worry about the effect on their neighborhood. Since there is a need for STRs, and at the same time not all parts of town want them, I suggest banning them in residential zones while allowing them in current beach communities that have their own zoning, mixed use, and commercial zones. So basically, 3 possibilities there. The owners were notified of the hearings, while most residents are not even aware of the discussion. I don't think it would be fair to base a recommendation on the percentage of opinions from the hearings. Under 200 owners should not determine the character of a town with 19,000 residents. For any significant policy change, having a referendum should be considered. Okay, so that's Ann's suggestions and responses to the questions posed.
Did you give him the questions or just the answer?
Her answer.
Give him
I think this was on our web page, but maybe we can make some extra copies of the questions asked. In case anyone's interested. I'm pretty sure these questions appear on the web page.
Yeah,
So
I think
you can take a look at what they are.
So-
I mean, pretty much, unless it's just a point of procedure, we put everything on the web page. The only thing that sometimes doesn't go on are drafts of things, because we want to create a situation where we're saying that this is what we've adopted. So we will put everything but drafts of our recommendations or drafts of questions, things like that, answers to questions. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think with respect to Anne's answers, certainly there has been a long history of homes and rooms being rented, and we've discussed that multiple times.
Yes.
People have been renting homes in East Lyme for generations. And that, to me, is the most compelling evidence to allow short-term rentals in East Lyme. There are some, for example, Pine Grove is the primary example.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, is Pine Grove the same as West Point? Do they have their own ability to create zoning?
No, they do not. Correct. So they are one of the communities that has restricted them.
Right.
Either, I'm not sure if it's through the bylaws or just practice. According to Beth Harris, it may be even in their deeds, but they do not have zoning authority. Those are Crescent Beach, Giant's Neck, and Black Point. And the other community that similarly restricts, that is a beach community, is Old Black Point, where longer-term rentals are the practice and the preference. So those two are very similar in that they don't have zoning authority, and at the same time they don't wish to have the seven days or whatever.
So I think in an attempt to be more clear about what we're talking about, we address the first question
First.
as a group, and then address the second question.
Okay.
And then I'll stop.
No, that's fine.
Well, Greg, what do you think? Do you see a difference in the history of renting beach community properties many years ago versus now with the advent of places like Airbnb? Meaning, it seems to be proliferating a lot more now, and it's all on the internet. Do you see that as a problem, especially in light of Granicus? Granicus, is that the name of the
Yes,
place? Granicus
yes.
is research that indicates that short-term rentals in East Lyme specifically is growing at a rate of, they said 10% or 15% per year. Does that have any impact on your analysis?
So, thank you for asking. One of the few things I thought about before I got here. But, along with dinner and other things. But, the history, again, we've all been coming here for a long time, living here for a long time. The history, when I first got here, was people rented for 30 days. And people would park their family in the house for 30 days, and the husbands would commute to work or work from home if they could, however it was. And of course, the situation has evolved, I think, is the right way to say it. And then the pandemic came along and just exacerbated all of that. People wanted to get out of the city, get away from all the other people, come to East Lyme and other beach communities for reasons that Tristan talked about. And I would have to say, now that we're not in the pandemic for the last couple of years, the occupancy seems to be diminishing. That's just as I drive down the street, views. But you're right. I mean, clearly, the internet changed everything, and the onset of short-term rentals and Airbnb and VRBO and others has changed everything. And not always for the better, but generally, the renters are not terrible. I took some donuts one time because I had extra. But yeah, no, the situation. People used to rent. Everybody rented. My in-laws rented.
Mm-hmm.
That's how my wife started coming down here. They would rent for a month and they'd keep it for a month.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a month. And you actually got to know the people that were renting for a month. You get to know people.
Right.
Now it's I'm in Saturday, somebody else is in Sunday, somebody else is in Monday, somebody else is in and none of that sounds crazy, but it has happened. There are other people that generally rent for 3, 4, up to a week, longer periods of time. I know in your community you asked them to rent for minimum 7 days. Correct. So to me it's not. Things change, they just evolve. It used to be you had to know somebody who was renting their house and call them up, in the spring and say, hey, I'd like to rent your house in August, or whatever. And now you just hop on the computer and you can see what's available and what it costs and when it's open and those kinds of things. And so it's just an evolution to get where we are today.
The question, though, is what has it evolved to? So if it's evolved, and it's evolved to something that is more consistent with hotel stay, motel stay, then it is different, I appreciate these are great facts because which I hadn't heard before about Oak Grove and some of the other beach communities. But this is where we, and John has spoken about this too, where we suddenly become a different kind of entity, right? The monthly rental where mom or dad is commuting to work while the other spouse is taking care of the kids or taking guests, having guests come for the day or whatever. That's a whole different kettle of fish than, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday stay.
But I think the answer to, I hope I answered your question, but the answer to the first question is, what evidence supports the existence of short-term rentals in Lyme? I think Ann hit it right on the head with her last sentence when she said there's been a long history of homes and rooms being rented in East Lyme. And somebody pointed out, well, she did in her first sentence, that the popularity of short-term rentals, we think, is growing. Although the experience in NOAC would suggest that there is an upper limit. If the price of the homes gets higher, I think Mr. Mulholland would say that if the price of the homes got higher, people stop renting because they don't want to rent their $3 million home. Mm-hmm. And, renting a $3 million home for even $1,000 a night isn't going to make your mortgage payment unless you're renting it 365 days a year. So it does tend to go out the other end. But bottom line, there's been a long history of rentals in East Lyme. And I think that's the strongest, in my opinion, that's the strongest point to support short-term rentals and continue having them.
And I'm just asking questions.
Yeah,
It's a
me
discussion
too.
first.
I just thought you were picking on me.
No.
That's fine because we all had to answer the question, so we all had to go through the same mental gymnastics here. So I'm thinking about the connection between the beach community experience and the rest of town. So for me, yes, I agree with you that is probably the most compelling, if not compelling, persuasive evidence to make that argument. However, I got stuck when I was saying, what about the rest of town? We have beach communities that may have had this experience. What about the Flanders end of town, the north end of town? What about beach communities that don't share the same view about rentals? So again, I get back to that same point, and I'll just make it here and probably talk about it again, that it seems as though one size doesn't fit all. But that's where I did not, although I found it good evidence and a strong argument, I didn't find it compelling and convincing because I felt as though we're forcing a model for some of the beach communities on the rest of the beach communities and the rest of town. And I'm not sure that's acceptable. You know, and I actually, in my little response, here, it's not as big as it looks because I attached my previous analysis too. But I did go through the differences within the beach communities. You know, it's pretty. They're not too alike. The closest that come to each other are your beach community and yours, with wanting that the 7 days or longer. Although you have zoning authority and you do not, so it's kind of a fascinating patchwork there. But anyway, I agree with you on that hunk. Another hunk of evidence that was somewhat persuasive, but again, I didn't find it compelling, were some of the financial benefits. And I went through that analysis. You know, where owners of short-term rental properties stand to gain. So that's a good thing. You know, they can make money and pay their mortgage and their taxes and their insurance. Local businesses stand to gain. We heard some of that in public delegations today. Although the problem with our evidence is that we weren't able to quantify that. And I think, Gary, you've mentioned that in the past too. We don't have that. It's very anecdotal, and it's hard to quantify that. But yeah, you know, because they're here, everyone's going to flock and you know, to the businesses. And an example of the contrary is Ledyard, where they actually banned short-term rentals. One of the reasons being they didn't see a benefit to the businesses there. People were just, you know, staying there but going elsewhere to eat and to be entertained, mainly the casino. So,
a little different town.
A different situation.
Ledyard.
But it just pointed to me in that,
right. Right.
Unless you can quantify it, it's hard. But it's a reasonable, and it's in the literature. Many observers say that yes, that's a reason to have them. We went through tax issues. So I won't belabor the point on tax issues, but those are financial. We know we can gain some personal property tax revenue, right? From our assessor told us that. However, it's, pardon the expression, chump change in comparison to real estate taxes. Real estate taxes don't change when you're, you know, because it's a short-term rental, used as a single-family dwelling, and then you rent it as a short-term rental. The analysis is the same. The valuation method, mass appraisal, is the same. So it's not like we're going to value that income for short-term rentals. And then add that to the pot, and somehow our assessor gets more money. That's not the way it works. So if I have a short-term rental, I pay my property tax on that. If you have a home and we have identical houses, valued the same, we're going to pay the same property tax. So that's not a benefit. The room occupancy tax, the state does benefit, and we all guess, we trickle down, we do benefit from that, but that's not direct. So those are some of the, so I found those good reasons, but not compelling. Like, I didn't find that financial component, although there's much made of that, to tell me, yeah, that's the direction you really want to go.
You're talking the financial benefit to short-term rental owners.
Yes, and the other financial benefits that the state then has, the municipality, the town of East Lyme would have.
Yeah, the state would certainly argue that they get a financial benefit.
Yes, they would.
At 30%.
Right, but in terms of how, that's indirect for us here in East Lyme, right? And anything that the town directly gets is a very small amount at this point. Unless the state changes it. There was an attempt to actually share that revenue, by the way, this past year in the legislation didn't happen, to share that revenue with us. So right now, that's the way the tax scenario stands. So when I looked at that question, I tried to figure out how I can characterize most of the evidence that was found, and it was your point about the history and the tradition, and the other part was the financial part. And I found them good, but not putting me over the hump. Yeah.
So what struck me was, from very early on, that short-term rentals are officially not allowed in East Lyme. There's no language in them, therefore they're not allowed. And yet we have at least 100, maybe 200,
Yeah, somewhere.
and maybe it's growing, operating in town. So I think that leaves the town wide open for perhaps arbitrary
Enforcement?
enforcement. That's
So there's nothing on the books saying you can't, or you
that is correct.
It
But
doesn't say you can't.
There's
it
nothing
says you
say,
can.
there's nothing that says it can. In East Lyme, zoning regulations are written in a permissible fashion. If it's not actually stated that it's permittable, it's not.
Where does it say?
So,
To follow the negative to your argument, because signage is allowed. You put on the front lawn saying this house is prevented.
long-term rents are allowed.
But they're not mentioned in the regulations. The only signage is allowed, and that's the decision. You can't allow long-term rentals by having a sign for them and say you can't have short-term rentals. So Mr. Zanarka said, Attorney Zanarka said that the short-term rentals are allowed as a result of the signing.
That was
listed in the Wee-
that
was
listed in
the
Yeah.
Weeby case. That was one of their
that's through the Whitby.
that's a
And,
decision. That's not,
and even one,
that's not East Lyme's decision.
and one can also argue that the signage issue in Whitby was not the complete rationale for that decision. I think it was a small part of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Speaks to the permissive actions of the zoning commission, the zoning regulations, which are permissive,
Right.
indicates it's not allowed if it's not stationed.
Yeah.
The attorney said because of the signage, they're allowed, which is why they have it done. The point is well taken.
That's
The
that
evidence
attorney's
is it's
opinion.
too big.
That was that attorney's opinion.
Right.
So, we just have to be, we'll just be mindful here, we can have, public questions later at the end, perhaps we'll try to, but we will address this question here since it was raised, that, yeah, generally speaking, under zoning law, if it's not permitted, if regulations are written in a permissive manner, which ours are, the rule is that items not mentioned are not allowed. Practices, uses not specified are not allowed. That's the
So if
general.
it's silent, can't do it. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
So,
we'll keep going there.
Sure.
so given that they are officially not allowed, but they're here and growing, and enforcement of it could be random, could be arbitrary. It could be somebody complains and the town takes an action, and yet the action is you're not allowed to rent here because that's not permitted use. But then we have 100 or 200 other places that are doing it, and they've been doing it for 100 years, and the town has done well by that. I just think that the town is vulnerable to lawsuits because we're not specific about this. And so for me, the most compelling evidence is that we should try to come up with a regulation that is fair to the homeowners, these are private homeowners, and fair to the owners who are landlords, who do have rents. And I also think, like Ann and like Greg mentioned, that for 100 years there have been rentals, not only in my neighborhood, but throughout the water communities and probably throughout town too, there are rentals, although not as many. That's why I think an ordinance that would be for the town, for a permit, makes sense. And then zoning regulations to correspond with that that the communities that have their own zoning can either adopt or do their own.
Gary, do you think there should be no constraints on the number of short-term rentals? Any property owner can rent their property as a short-term rental? That's what I'm hearing.
Well,
which is fine. I'm just
yeah, and I don't think that, because in other conversations I've had with my neighbors, and I've had a lot of them, what they raise as a concern and a fear is, and I've said this at the last meeting, the character of the neighborhood could change. If too many rentals are in a community, you lose the neighbors helping neighbors aspects. The meals to the sick, the transportation, walking the dogs, whatever it takes to be a good neighbor. You don't get that in a community that's primarily rental. And that's a legitimate concern, but we don't have enough data to even, we don't have a very good handle on how many are out there. So yes, I might be in favor of restricting them if it got to a point like that. I don't think we're at that point now, and I don't think we'll ever know if we're at that point until we put some procedures in place so we can manage it and count them and find out how many there are.
So would you be okay, for example, allowing short-term rentals that exist now and then banning new short-term rentals? Is that something that you think would serve East Lyme or not?
I think right now, I would say I would be against that.
Okay.
But I'm open to hearing other arguments about that. I don't think that problem exists right now.
So you're okay with kind of, this is just thought, just thinking out loud, you're okay with kind of allowing this to just continue to evolve, like Greg is saying, right? And then revisit the issue 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, if we see a proliferation of short-term rentals that's causing a problem with the character of the town.
Absolutely. But 5 years down the road, for example, we would have 5 years worth of data of permits, and whether they went up or they went down, or how many days and all that stuff. We would have that data. We could make more informed decisions. I did read a story, and it was a few months ago. It was either in the Washington Post or the New York Times that said that while VRBO and Airbnb are seeing record profits and increased revenue, that year over year, people who use those services are seeing fewer bookings. And if that's the case, then that tells me that the market's kind of taking care of this issue by itself.
I've read similar articles that have suggested that there's a saturation point, if you will. So the literature is out there with respect to that issue. And I've read articles that have said these companies are going to tank because they're going to proliferate so much that people aren't going to be they're not going to be renting them as much. So then the short-term rental owner is then saying, well, I have this, not a $3 million property, but maybe a $500,000 property that I don't want to rent anymore because I'm not making any money. So those scenarios in the literature is out there, correct?
Yes.
All right, so you're for waiting, and because you don't see 100 years of data as sufficient. We haven't had 100 years. It's really only been a few years of Airbnbs and
Correct.
those kinds of things. Fair enough. Okay.
I vacation in Bethany Beach in Delaware, which is swamped with short-term rentals. Most of them are a week is the minimum, but then they're not really neighborhoods. They're little individual businesses next to each other in a residential area.
Right.
And my neighbors who are concerned, that's their concern. They love the character of the neighborhood and they want to preserve it. But the character of the neighborhood has included decades and decades of rentals, short-term and long.
That's the character of those neighborhoods.
Right.
So we're more concerned because we're not Bethany Beach, and the Cooks is not Bethany Beach.
Correct.
And I'm sorry?
This is better.
Oh, Connecticut's beautiful.
Well, climate change.
Thought I'd throw that
No. Connecticut has a beautiful shoreline, right? He distracted.
But we're not those. You were saying we are not those communities.
Right.
throughout the town.
So I see these beach communities in East Lyme as being fairly unique with these communities, and that's what attracts everyone, and that's what I hear. I'm not familiar with these places, but I hear all the people talking about how wonderful these communities are, and the interaction of the people and the community involvement. So I guess if we allow them to be overtaken by transient people, is that going to be a major loss to East Lyme? And I don't know, you folks live in these beach communities. If you don't think it's a problem that we can turn them into commercial zones, then that's fine.
So you've moved to question 2.
Sorry?
So you've moved on to question 2.
Not quite yet.
That certainly is a supportive of.
It's just a question.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to focus.
No, it's true. So,
No?
yeah.
Do you want to talk? Go ahead.
So I'm trying to figure out what we're actually talking about. And are we sharing our own opinions, or are we going just to the question
we're
of
at-
support, or?
We're at question 1 and trying to isolate that best evidence and that people feel is best evidence to support the townwide short-term rentals. And meanwhile, you can jump in if you feel that someone
Right.
makes a point and that you say, you disagree with the weight of that evidence, or you have other evidence, that kind of thing. Just to kind of go through, I know it's a bit painful, but we do need to go through this evidentiary process a little bit.
Just for me, I thought the same discussion about it's very difficult to try to separate supporting or understanding black or white. So I included my remarks to consider both. Not to consider both, but to address both.
I kind of do the same thing, Paul, so that's, yeah.
Gary's position about is the neighborhood going to be overrun with short-term rentals? This is, and again, you were very careful to put apart from your personal experiences, so it's difficult to relate how we're living in these communities. But more and more in Giant Center, people living there nearby. They're not living there seasonally. There are a lot of seasonal places that close up right about now and open up, late April or May, and they turn the water off and they turn the water on. There are less this year than there were last, and less last year than there were the year before, because more and more people are fixing up their homes and staying there year-round. Children. So I think one of the kind of counters to the point where the neighborhood is going to be taken over like those places on the Jersey Shore is that people are not going to do that. There are going to be some people that rent short-term rentals, pay their mortgage and their expenses. There are others who are renting it to pay their mortgage and expenses with the idea that
Yeah, I just wanted to back up on, your point about the concern expressed by your neighbors, and, and this will go to question 2, obviously, but we did have similar concerns actually articulated before us in the public hearing, in our emails, in our public delegations. Again, we had more evidence given to us from owners, and that perspective of being a short-term rental owner was given to us more frequently.
We also heard from a number of short-term rental landlords who said that they were fine with a permitting process. He said we also heard during public testimony from a number of short-term rental landlords who said they would be fine with the permitting process.
So, to your point about let's go to the first question. Just want to say that what Paul has raised and what we've been raising kind of all go to sort of basic how to make policy questions. How do we do that? And I talk about that a little bit, just briefly in my answers, making the point that policy should be for the good of the town as a whole, and that kind of thing, those basic policy norms, but also at the same time we have to protect property rights and land use rights. So, we have a large task, but that's definitely in coming up with policy. We do have to, how can I say this? You can't always be reactive, I guess that's it. The policy is often adopted to be, proactive. And I think I started to see, when I went back and looked at our paper that we wrote and, the hearing testimony, started to, especially in our paper, other towns that have dealt with this have acted to regulate, even to go as far as banning, with very little, like in acting proactively. So I'm not sure from a policy perspective, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but the wisdom of waiting till the avalanche comes. Just a thought from a policy perspective. I mean, when you try to adopt policies, I mean that's sort of the reason for our being as a committee looking at this problem. We're teetering on something in town. We know it's not like it used to be, right? So we've gotten complaints. The previous first selectman I heard complaints, etc. So we're trying to get a handle on it. So the idea is to try to find policy, and no policy is perfect, but try to find a policy that hits as many targets as possible, but doesn't wait for the bad stuff to happen. That would be my caveat to what you said. In theory, I like the idea of let's take a wait and see, but when you need to act as a government on behalf of all the residents, you've got to do things proactively. So, and
you also have to recognize that there's a serious problem.
Yes.
And we've not heard that there's a serious problem. We've not heard it. We've heard a couple of isolated incidents from Greg. We've heard a couple isolated parking requirements in Giants Neck Heights. We've just not heard the severity of the problem that you keep representing that we're hearing. And we haven't heard it. We look through all the papers that we have. It just hasn't occurred. And I am a short-term rental. So I'm trying to look at this objectively. Are we, I offered opportunities for registration. I offered opportunity for the enforcement officials to write in the annual report, which they do every year, and present to the selectmen what's going on with short-term rentals. Add that as a portion of the report, so that to Gary's point, we can kind of see what's happening, because we'll have a collective viewpoint from those people on the front lines who are dealing with it, if there is a problem. And who knows, we decide whatever we decide to put forth to the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah.
And then they may go through this whole process again and enact whatever they want to enact. And then the new Board of Selectmen that gets elected 2 years from now says, okay, enough.
Yeah, I
We're
agree
gonna
with you
change
that, I agree
So-
with you that it is evolving.
My
Yeah.
point is
I
that,
agree with
you
you.
know, what we have to act on is what's happening now. And what's happening now in front of us has been during public hearings, during public delegations, during conversations that we've had. There has been a very insignificant amount of people saying that this is not working. There's 1 or 2 homes that we've heard. It's just not here. So that's what I'm having trouble with. I don't mind offering up a registration system. I don't mind offering up the opportunity for inspections to keep people safe. I think there are certain things we can do to support long-term rentals, but we've heard overwhelmingly that people want to support it, not ban it.
That is in part, Paul, because we've heard from owners of short-term rentals.
But-
We are not hearing from the public,
So
the
let me ask you,
neighbors.
I have a budget question.
Yeah.
You know, we had, when I was here, we bought the gas station. People that lived on and worked on Main Street were very excited about that. But the entire town turned out to talk about that gas station. There was more percentage of voting on the gas station than there was on the budget. So my point to you is that if people feel like there's an issue, they're gonna find out the form for which to express their views. And they're gonna come. If they don't think it's an issue, then they're not gonna. We've been in the news, we've been talked about
Yeah,
for people.
sure.
People know that this is existing, people know it's been in the paper, the front page of the paper, it's been
Would you,
everywhere. So
I take a little disagreement with that. Would your neighbor, your short-term rental, your neighbor on your other side of you, obviously you live next door, you live right next to your short-term rental controller. And that's a unique situation, so you know what's going on there. But if you look at where his situation is in your neighborhood, if you ask the neighbors to the left and right of that short-term rental if they would prefer it or they wouldn't prefer it, I think they'd have a different view. So if it's not in their face at this particular time, they're not really concerned about it. But when one comes in and is next door to them, they might well have a different opinion. That's the silent majority. I think that all I've heard, I sit here with all the comments. We talk about history, we talk about tradition, we talk about you know where we've been in precedent setting. Okay, it's not allowed by zoning. Zoning doesn't allow any rentals at all in this town, for that matter. Zoning needs to zoning regulations need to be updated to allow long-term rentals because there's been history. Everybody in America, everybody rents their homes. Okay, so why is this any different? Well, the thing I think is that for history goes, since I was a little kid, so my personal experiences, or anybody else's around here, is that when I'm 71 years old, that everybody used to come to the beach and rent for a week. A week. That's what you rent for. That's what's been traditional for, talking about mentioning 100 years. Go back 200 years. It's a weekly rental. When you get below a weekly rental, it's transient business. It's all done. Okay, unless you're bed and breakfast and that's special zone. Hotels, special zone. There is different classification. So when I look at this, and we've all accepted, everybody has accepted a weekly rental. Okay, in America, there's never been an objection to that. There's an uproar. The uproar is that now we're going from weekly rent to transient. Now look at it. If you want to get $2,000-3,000 a night, and you want to get around the world, rent it for the week. You just show up 2 nights, go home. We're not going to stop that. You've been doing that for years if you want to do it. But to allow a business to come into town, into a neighborhood, and allow it on a free-for-all basis, right? We'd go nuts if somebody had a bed and breakfast and it wasn't zoning. Zoning would be out there trying to stop them tomorrow. Right?
Bed and breakfasts are allowed in every residential community.
With a permit.
With a permit, special
with
permit.
the owner there.
Special permit.
And we're talking about registration, we're talking about
But remember, bed and breakfast has somebody living in the house too.
Correct.
Okay, and monitoring it. Right? And so I look at, again, we can get into minute details, but in general, it's a weekly, everybody's had, beach communities and weekly rentals have been standard forever. Simply what Airbnb did is what Amazon did. You got internet now, and it's allowed you to do this and made it easy. And so, and then people started, Airbnb started with rooms. You rent out a room in your house, okay? But you're there. You're there. They're not there in your neighborhood, okay? And where we've had a few complaints, and I think that, I know in my personal case, I'd be very disappointed if I had an Airbnb next to me and it was transient. If the owner's living there and he wants to bring somebody in, that's fine, he's there. You can invite any number of guests. So I think that if we go back to history, and we should just, I personally don't think that, weekly rental, and I don't think we should start inspections for people who are in for weekly inspections. First of all, we're going to have more regulations, more enforcement, more personnel, more problems. So in registration, we're just causing, more regulations, which I don't think that, in general, America is kind of getting sick and tired of regulations and permitting and inspections. But again, if you're a hotel, and it's a transient business now. You're talking about cleaning. People coming in every day to do cleaning, changing things. It's a whole different deal, transient. And there has to be a line. The first meeting we went to, there's got to be a line difference. And then that line difference also will come into play with taxes. So I do disagree. I think at some point, if you run a residential business, you're going to be taxed differently. If we have weekly rentals, that's accepted. We're not going to be taxed differently. But if you were running a hotel, the hotels are taxed as commercial properties, and they have to pay. They have to pay. They're in business, and they're going to pay the occupancy tax. We have no idea how many people who are running these Airbnbs. I'm granted, you can get Airbnbs and you can pick up the occupancy tax. How many people are doing without paying Airbnbs? It's not just that. You run pet rentals and pet dog walking, all this stuff, and they do this online. They get anywhere from 10 to 20, 30% of the fee. When you go talk to them the first time, they say, look, we paid this time. Just don't call them. Call me direct so I don't have to do that. So the same thing's happening with Airbnbs. Right? Here's my card. Just like with Uber. Don't call me an Uber, take me to the airport. Here's my personal phone number. It happens to me all the time when I travel. Here's my way to get so I think that I don't see why we just don't follow tradition here. Tradition is 7 days. If you want to rent nobody's going to stop you for renting for 2 nights. Just don't rent it for the other 7. So charge them the same rate for 2 nights as you do 7.
I mean, that's a good thought, but it's marketably not going to happen. In real life, practically,
Why?
it's not going to happen because nobody's going to pay a week and stay there for 2 nights. It's going to be.
If your competitor is charging $2,000 a night,
have a 3-day minimum. You're talking about cell phones versus pay phones, Ubers versus taxis. Life is changing. The way we live changes.
Why should we allow somebody to put business in it? There was an example recently.
Are you going to have a lawyer who's sitting in his house with his office in his home, or you're going to charge him the same that you're charging a short-term employees? People are working from home.
And that is allowed. You have one employee, I believe, or something like that. I don't remember. Every town is different. But for example, hold on, Paul. There's recently there was a business in town that you might be familiar with, but there was a business in town, and another business opened up, and they put signs everywhere, okay? And zoning didn't do anything about it. Why was that gentleman upset? Because it could be cut into his business, all right? So when you run short-term rentals, and you're running a transient business, you're cutting into a guy who runs a hotel business and who runs a bed and breakfast. So, I mean, I think
you're going to need community that's changing. People want to be with their families. They can't do it with 4 hotel rooms along the corridor as well as they can inside of an apartment or a single-family home.
Rent it for a week then.
That's how this developed. Just like people don't want to put a quarter in their pocket, they'd rather carry this around.
But there's zone, we can do that. We can allow that. Allow transit zone in a commercial business, in a commercial zone. Don't do it in residential zone. We have plenty of homes. We have plenty of homes in commercial zones. No, we have plenty of homes that are in commercial zones.
Okay.
And if you're going to a commercial business, be in a commercial zone. That's fine. But if you're in a residential zone, we should have a week minimum. That's fine. I frankly
still a business, whether it's 7 days, 3 or 1.
No, it's just, no, but we, traditionally in America, you rented for a weekly stay. That's a given. Nobody's objected for people renting on a weekly basis,
Okay.
especially in East Lyme.
We're getting into a little bit of the
No, that's what discussion's
No,
about.
that's fine.
No,
I
it was
don't know.
good.
Let
That
me
was-
finish my sentence. It was good exchange. Just
Yeah.
getting into weeds on, recommendations, specific recommendations. Let's bring that conversation still back to the evidence, okay? And Gary, were you finished with your?
I had one other
Yeah,
thing to
please.
say, but
Yeah.
Paul
Kept
kind of
interrupting.
made this point.
Okay.
We heard
Go
from
ahead.
two police chiefs who said this is not a big problem in the town. Short-term rentals are not a big problem.
We heard
But
from who?
they also, from two police chiefs.
Yeah, right.
So,
But at the same time, one of them said, more information is always better. If we had data of who the owners were, who the contacts were, we would appreciate that. It would help us with law enforcement.
and in fact, to your point, heard the same information that you were relating, and the problem I had with that, for our purposes, is that the police chiefs, both of them, said that you cannot tell when you are responding to a home 911 or some other issue. What is this a short-term rental situation? Is this the owner? Whatever it is. So that data, yes, that's not been provided. So I found that not really helpful. I know that we don't have, we're not getting, the phone isn't.
911, doesn't matter if it's a homeowner or not, if it's a call.
Sorry, sir.
It's all right, we're having the discussion. We're
Sorry,
opening up the public.
No.
It's mind-boggling right now.
Well, I'm sorry.
One second. So we're really trying to discuss all the issues. That's the purpose of this conversation, is to address all the issues, not just to land, not just to approve one side, or one opinion or the other. I am dissatisfied with. I just don't believe we've addressed all the issues. I think we're doing it in the last couple of meetings that we've had. Okay, so I think this has been a very positive discussion last time and this time, and that's what we're doing. We're having a discussion of all the options and issues. That's all. We're not reaching agreements right now. We're not making factions yet. We're just having a discussion. People may think it's mind-boggling. Well, we've been here for almost 2 years. You better believe it's mind-boggling. It's a very difficult issue. And if you don't like the way we're doing it, then I apologize. Okay, but it's a tough issue. Okay, and we're trying. That's good. We're trying to do is we're trying to consider all the options, because people in town, people all over the world, they're split on this issue. So that's what we're trying to do. Period. And Paul, I would really love to hear you say one good thing about, or one negative thing about short-term rentals, just to show that, for the record, that you can actually consider the other side. Because people want to talk about bias. You are a short-term rental owner, but and you're very, very thoughtful, and I agree with many of the things you say. But I want to hear you say one thing. You don't have to agree with it. I just want to hear you say one good thing about limiting short-term rentals, as an argument, not as a position, just as an argument. Can you do that?
Well, I have my paper here, and
Tell me.
I'm not getting personal with you, so...
No, I'm not personal. I just want to hear...
I don't expect that in return, but, I have to say that my personal experience is going to be part of this answer.
Well, go ahead.
Irrespective of your...
That's fine.
It says not to bring that in.
Yeah, just trying to be as objective as possible.
That's it.
I just
In the
think
review
that
of
government
evidence.
sometimes gets to be too rigid. And I think
Too rigid.
And I don't think we take into consideration people's lives and the way they live. And we try to regulate based on whatever opinion we have from whatever side of the table versus trying trying to make it easier for people. If you're renting for 7 days, or 3 days, or 1 day, or 21 days, or 365 days, you're still exchanging money from one person to the other, and you can still construe that as a business. So I don't agree with my esteemed colleagues, argument. In my thing, if you'd like me to go over
Yeah,
this,
sure,
I'd be
go
happy
ahead,
to
go
do
ahead.
that.
And it's okay if it blends with question two,
It's
because,
gonna happen.
and mine does as well,
If you
so.
want to stop me.
Go ahead. No.
During our existence, in public hearings, delegations, conversations, there have only been 1 or 2 problem addresses associated with it. Greg's neighborhood is pretty much the biggest problem. There were a few conversations about parking and noise issues. Giants Neck Heights brought that up. And there was very limited support for a ban. Less than a handful of people said let's ban it. All the information that we've gotten for all the 15 or 16 months that we've been doing this, net of our sabbatical in the Supreme Court decision.
Right.
We've had zoning people, our fire officials, health officials. They did not report any significant problems related to short-term rentals. They did say, perhaps from their seat, which we would expect them to say, they would like to see inspections. They are public safety officials, and that's their charge. Oak Grove Beach identified 1 or 2 homes causing noise and parking issues, but it was testified that they never reported those to see if the police would come and put out those fires one way or the other. And I think we have the opportunity to address parking issues through the police commission. We have opportunities to address noise. If the police want to come and say you're too loud, you're too loud. And their presence is a lot of times quiets people. And I think a lot of the conversations that the chairs have brought up has been reliance on other communities. Nolank, for example, has been a big part of our discussion. In Nolank, you can open your window, reach across, and open or close the window to the people who live next door to you. And so I don't think that that's an applicable argument here. Preston has the casinos that they're doing. I don't think that's an applicable argument or comparison here in East Lyme. I think we have to deal with what we have here and who we have here and make our best decision. So I've offered a registration system in my previous testimony, annual reporting from the town agencies, which I just talked about, which will report on actual impacts to Gary's point. What are we seeing? What are we hearing? What is the community doing? The 2 police chiefs said they didn't hear anything about short-term rentals. But it doesn't mean that they didn't know it was a short-term rental or not. If they arrested somebody, they certainly would know that these people were living in Glastonbury and not, or Rocky Hill or some other place, and renting from here and not living here full time. They would know that. But they would have reported that, I think, if they came. I have not heard any evidence that would indicate the need to ban it or to impose a limit only long-term rentals, which is what the second question asked for. I don't think the Supreme Court supported that particular option either. So I don't think we'd be within our realm of legality if we just said no short-term rentals, but only long-term rentals. And what's the day we would have to consider? So I suggest a 3-day short-term minimum stay, which would in effect eliminate the 1-night, 2-night parties that seem to be the problem for most. And your last comment on the way out of the last meeting, asked about do we want to have short-term rentals restrictions on houses. And you kind of made the same finger pointing you just did to me then as you did to me now about, I'm in favor of something. And not willing to see and talk about a bad idea, but, there's a lot of bad ideas. So after some reconsideration, I would support an effort to establish a restriction on the number of short-term rentals in the community. I'm just not quite sure how you would legally get away with that. If there's 9,250 homes, I don't know, do you know how many homes in the town? I think there's somewhere around 9,000 in short-term, right? And if you said 10% of those that's 900, 5% is 450, 2% is 270, 225. You know, what's the number? How do you determine what that is? If we have, I think, a number between 190 and 210 is talked about having short-term rentals on the websites right now. So we already have 200.
That doesn't seem fair. That's not level of playing
So
field.
do we want to say, is it 4% or 5% that we want to restrict? Because I don't think we can say, you're non-conforming, pre-existing non-conforming, and everybody's okay, but you can't have anybody else. Because I'm sure the attorney would agree with me that would be cause for litigation based on what we see with the Supreme Court and everything else.
So you're suggesting a tax, that you are suggesting some kind of tax.
I am, right, in response to what Gary said at the end of the meeting, I would be interested in seeing what a formula would look like. I don't know that we can effectively create a formula.
Right.
Correct, but that's
the
a
question
thought.
was, do we want to have 9,150 of the 9,200 homes being short-term rental? I mean, I first of all, as I answered you last time, I don't
Right.
think that's practical, and I don't think people would do it. So I think there are opportunities to register. My idea the last time was to go through the assessor's office and not charge a fee, let them figure out what's going on. They would need state legislation in order to change their tax collection
Yes.
policy.
Yes.
So who knows where that's going to go?
That's to John's point, which, you know, we articulated what the tax law is at this point. It could or should be different, but at this
But I
moment,
think-
that's what we've got.
But I think if you do tax short-term rentals, for example, how could you not tax the attorney who has an office in the
Yeah,
town?
I mean, it opens up
It's a
everything.
rent, it's cash
Yeah.
business, just like the thing. You'd have to, there's so many variables and rabbit holes that you go down. I think it'd be a difficult discussion. And I think this would be the same, trying to figure out how you limit it, especially given that my reading of the Supreme Court was you can't do that. You have a right to rent long-term, you have a right to rent short-term. So my question to you, Greg, would be that, you know, how is this summer? The summer of 24 as bad for you as the summer of 23 was? Because when we started, remember we were in the summer of 23.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that in the answer to Gary's question. The rental occupancy is lower.
But have you had the same level of problems in the summer of 24 that you had in the summer of 23?
So I'm old. Time is fuzzy. I think we had. It's interesting that you mentioned that because as for John, you said people that rent for 7 days, not going to be a problem. We had some people rent for 7 days. That was the worst experience that we had. It was they rented it for 7 days. They brought in their jet skis. They put up tents on the beach. They just were loud and we're just like, wow, 7 days. This is what we get. Oh, great. But that was just as I said before, most of the people that come and do short-term rentals, we never see. Our situation is, I don't know if people have been to Oak Grove Beach, but there's a beach, about 20 houses along that stretch of beach. 7 of them are short-term rentals. But the good news is, there's a beach. And so they just go out the front door, and they're on the beach. They don't come down to the public beach. I mean, there's public as well. But theirs is relatively short. But, it's there, and everything they need is right behind them in the house they're renting. And so we don't have to have them on the main beach where everybody who lives there goes. So the short answer is no. We haven't had the same number of problems we had in 2023. If that's because of the collapse of
the reason I
pandemic.
think part of that is I think Airbnb has changed their approach to their advertising over the last year to reflect the need to be more restrictive and to be more compassionate to the community. I think VRBO has probably had a better history than the Airbnb about renting to those people. I live next door, but I also, we require X number of parking spaces. We have a maximum on that. We have a maximum for 3-day minimum. We have, there are a lot of controls that we put in on the website before people even ask to come to see what we are. And I think more and more people are going to do stuff like that. So I don't know if I picked up any negative things about short-term rentals there.
How about
Gary, but,
valuation?
you know, you asked me, I'm trying to come up with something negative to say about it. But the people are trying, you know, people want this experience. They want this, just like they want to get in an Uber and go wherever they want versus waiting for a yellow cab. Life changes, and we have to change with it. So if we're looking at regulating these things, I don't think it's an up or down yes or no. You want to list them so if there's an issue that, you know, Bill Bundy, you know, wants to find the owner of the house at 11:55 p.m. at night because something's going on, there should be some database somewhere that would allow him to do that. And I don't think that anybody that has a short-term rental would disagree with that.
And we, in fact, when we heard testimony from owners, they were okay with those kinds of systems, you know, registries and this kind of thing. Just two points. One, I think Libby did open the door to longer-term rentals and having essentially a ban of what is short-term rentals using that state definition. So
They said ban.
No, I mean, in other
They said
words.
regulate, right?
Right, you can go forth and regulate. There's nothing prohibiting you from doing that, and Libby, that I can read. And then they also open that door at the end of the decision and sort of set a path that if you don't want short-term rentals, you can go for longer-term rentals. So I think it's all on the table, all of it. Regulation, you know, 30 days and more, under 30 days. Your suggestion for 7 days, it's all up for grabs. I don't think Libby is another point, and I tried to ask Attorney Markovitz, didn't really answer in the last memo that I got, that we all got. I don't think it restricts by zone either. If you want to regulate by zone and just say, you know, we're going to put them in, you know, these particular zones, allow them that here, but maybe not allow them here for whatever reason. That could fly as well. So just the point about Libby. The other point I think is far more important. So examples from other towns. Yeah, you can't get mired in, you know, making those comparisons. We went through pretty much every town in Connecticut, for example, and we went beyond Connecticut too, when we got literature. But it did serve a very good purpose because, you know, we don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we also share many of the issues about short-term rentals, you know, whether it's zoning versus ordinance, whether it's having beach communities, you know, whether it's concern for the integrity, maintaining the integrity of neighborhoods, the residential character of neighborhoods. These are shared things, and I think, you know, we definitely benefit from those examples. And of course, physically, one town can be different from another. Every town has different needs. My God, if you look at the beach communities in this town, and I set it forth in my paper here, each and every one is different. So, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking to see how shared issues have been addressed, and you'd be very surprised. You know, whether it's Simsbury, whether it's Basra, you know, there's so much similarity in the concerns. And Preston, I thought, you know, had done, I think, it provides a nice example. If you are going to allow them and you are going to regulate, here's an example of how to do it. They're not particularly onerous, and they're really trying hard, maybe not to regulate by zone, but to regulate by, if your neighborhood looks like this, and the lots are like this, and this is a problem with distance between homes and this and that. So, I mean, I think there's much to be learned, because all municipalities in the state are at different points, you know, in their grappling with this. So just wanted to point that out, that there's something to be helpful from me.
Well, there's been some talk about the neighborhoods being disenfranchised by having people come in on short term. I see quite the opposite. People come in this past weekend for 2 nights or 3 nights because they're son moved here, away from New Jersey, and I'm from Tennessee. That connection with the community. People that lived here when they were 5 and 6 are coming back when they're 30 and 40, revisiting the community. That is a sense of community. I'm sure you have the same people coming back for years and years and years from points in Connecticut and points outside of Connecticut.
They do. They work for a week.
The kids grew up on the shore.
They do. It's true.
Jobs. My dad worked for U.S. Rubber in 1953. Went in Monday at 8, came back, Friday at 4. That was it. The world doesn't work that way. People don't live and work that way. Some people do, but the majority of people have other options and have other opportunities. And what we have to do when we're creating regulations is to give us and give them the opportunity to live within them.
True, but without harming without harming your neighborhoods or your adjoining people. If I had you have in this town we have many waterfront homes. I doubt there's many that are worth less than $1 million on the waterfront. Many of them multiples of that number. And you have a short-term rental who's running it as a transient rental operation next door to you. I would tend to agree, at least think, that would be devaluing my property next door. I think if I went to sell my home and I had, a transient operation next door, it's going to devalue my house. I bought my house in the neighborhood. I didn't buy it in a commercial zone. I bought it into, next in an area that I was thinking full well that weekly rentals and long-term rentals have been allowed for 100 years. Keep using that. Being facetious, obviously.
No.
But, so I do disagree. I think that you and I agree that there should be a time frame, whether it be 3 nights or a week. A week is traditional, and that's what has been allowed.
3 nights is new way.
Well, it may be new, but it's not new to the people. It's not new to in the residential zone or zone that way. And to follow up on that point, I don't think we can it should be an ordinance because we can't grandfather in what's there. That's not leveling the playing field. That's making people with short-term rentals now a lot more valuable because the barrier of entry is more difficult then. Okay, so I don't think that's fair. So I think limiting something like that is not the right answer. But I do feel that we haven't had not a lot of discussion. Maybe we should from real estate appraisers and looking because I think that would be. I can't imagine that if I'm looking to move into whatever Giant's Neck and I'm going to buy a waterfront home and I've got a short-term rental next door that that wouldn't affect my decision to buy that home. Now maybe on the other side of the coin, maybe it's worth more because if somebody wants to run to have a short-term rental, they'll pay more for the house. That is possible. So so I'm not sure but I know for one thing is that if I'm looking for a shorefront community and I'm buying a home whether it be on the water or in one of our communities or anywhere, I definitely would think that having in a neighborhood where we have really close perimeters and small lots anywhere in East Lyme, but that's be on the shoreline anywhere, I would think that having a business next door to me or a short-term rentals on a transient basis would affect my value, my decision to buy that home. And I think that if anybody would take the opposite view of that, I think that is being naive. And it goes against all real estate, valuation principles. So
we have, John, seen that analysis in the literature we've read. Your point is well taken. That people don't, if they want to live in permanent residence and in let's say a family-oriented neighborhood, they're not really wishing to they don't buy their home based on the fact that there's an STR next door. I mean, that would be probably.
Do they not buy it because there's an STR next to it?
I mean, it's possible.
Okay. We don't have any evidence on it.
Right. No, I don't have that evidence, but that discussion, in the discussion about the eroding of residential neighborhoods by these kinds of operations, that is a point to take. Yeah.
Again, the only thing Paul and I are different upon is 3 days, I'm 7 days.
But you're both, your time limits are both short-term rentals. 3 or 7 considered short-term rentals.
Hey, I'm not against short-term rentals.
No, I'm just saying the time is.
Again, I'd like to see more evidence on all of this, but I find us, and I hear, some people in this room and some others we've heard, litigation. They're woven litigation lawsuits. Bring it on.
Yeah.
That's for, you're a litigator.
Yeah.
It's the way of life.
You said it last time. You said no matter what the town does.
Right, you're in litigation, right?
Right.
Exactly.
We're
Bring
always
it on.
open to that.
And the cost of bringing it on from them is to make a case. Let them pay it. It's good for them.
So, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump.
Makes money for you.
Lots of billable hours.
That's right.
In
And it takes years in court.
In the interest of time, I'm going to take them. We will come back to question 2 and more about question 2. But our fire marshal and assistant fire marshal are here, and I think it's good for you to hear some of the conversation as well. I'm sorry it's so detailed or in the weeds there.
We haven't heard from our co-chair what his opinion is.
I'd rather hear from the fire
So I
marshal.
think we're going to come back. We're going to come back to this and wrap up that. But I just want
You're talking about
Greg had provided some information about regulation.
So real briefly, I can just summarize where this came from. My neighbor has a condo in Vermont on one of those mountains. Yeah.
Speak up a little.
Say, my neighbor has a condo on Okemo Mountain, about halfway up, and down below them there was another condo building. It's 4 units. The end unit caught fire and basically burned down. They were able to save the others, but as a result of that, they sent out that Vermont fire stuff to all the tenants because there were lots of rumors that that end unit there were 16 people in there, and it was supposed to sleep 8. And so they started just trying to remind people that, hey, we can't just stuff all these bodies in there because there are codes and fire codes and things that apply. So that's where that came from, and I just sent it in because I thought it was interesting how they differentiated different levels.
We skimmed through it, Eric and I, and Vermont, it appears they're modeling whatever document that was drafted based on the NFPA standards. Connecticut, NFPA utilizes a guide. We have the Connecticut Fire Code and the IFC specifically address each unit, which type of occupancies are inspectable for life safety and fire-related issues. National Fire Protection Agency. It's the guide for what we utilize. In Connecticut, the IFC and the Connecticut Fire Code is designed for multifamilies, 3-family or better. It's based on the type of occupancy, and that's kind of established by your building requirements, whether it's mercantile, residential, assemblies, and whatnot. And based on the classification, that will determine if you're an inspectable property, and if so, what type of schedule. In researching all of this, and I think the very first time I spoke to the committee, short-term rentals weren't considered by the fire community, if you would, locally, to be an inspectable property because typically they're a single-family residence, and we don't inspect single-family residents. There are occasions where we have been brought in to do an inspection on a single-family residence with fire-related issues, and it's typically during a sale. During the closing, you may get an attorney or an insurance company that will ask us to go in, and we'll basically take the basic fire code, fire extinguishers, working smoke detectors, electric things, and give them, although it's not enforceable on our end, we'll give them some kind of a letter, I don't say certified, but give them an indication that it would be up to code if we were inspecting them as a property. Eric did doing some research with the code. We found some verbiage in the Connecticut Fire Code and the IFC relative to what would be a short-term rental property. And it would be a single-family dwelling being rented to 7 or more people. So if you had a single-family residence listed as a short-term rental property and it's renting to more than 7 people, we have the authority at that point to go in and do an annual inspection based on the IFC and the life safety code. And that inspection would be things like I just mentioned, fire extinguishers, working
smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, make sure that means of egresses are not impeded. And basically at the end of that, you get a certain, a letter indicating that you've met the code, for that property.
So this calls for, each bedroom will have a secondary means of egress.
Correct. I'll let Eric.
So basically, if we were to do an inspection on one of these properties and you go and you try to put a extra bed in a room that has no windows, just one way in, one way out, we would tell you, no, that's not allowed. We would give you a code citation and say you've got to have 2 ways in or out. There are some exceptions if you put in home sprinkler systems, but that doesn't really apply to Lyme because there really aren't any single-family homes that have them. We do, like Chief Bundy said, we have gone to some single-family homes. Usually it's certified that the smoke detectors are in date, they're working. We do have some homes in town that employers own, and they house some of their employees there. And we go in at the owner's request to make sure it's safe. So we have paperwork already set up for what we would be checking, and our certification form that it's already set to go.
It's similar models like what we would issue like for a
Liquor permit.
A liquor permit. The models that it's compliant. It was at the time of the inspection there were no violations. At the time of the inspection there were violations, but it's not going to preclude a certificate being issued, or it's not recommended to issue a certificate based on violations.
If you have a bedroom or a window, that's a second or third floor.
That's acceptable.
Or somebody just
That's classified as a second means of egress, a second way out, because we will show up and we can still get you in, get you out.
Okay, with a ladder truck.
Correct. Right. I think it's more designed for the low grade properties that may have a full grade that's below, and then you were to forward north or position off a designated bedroom, if you would, and it didn't have a window. The only way in and out is that one bedroom door. And in some cases, the code does also address like a split level where the room below grade has a window, but it doesn't meet the size requirements for means of egress. So it's kind of specific in that regard. The one thing I do want to mention that when there was some conversation about not having inspections for these type of properties, I would only for food for thought, and I may stick my head in the lion's mouth by saying this, but when you're looking at a family who's bringing 8 people down to the shoreline and they're going to stay in a hotel and they may rent 2 rooms, there's an expectation that when you go into that establishment, it has a working smoke detector, it has working carbon monoxide detectors, that all the egresses are not blocked because it's been inspected. If you were to take that same family and put them into a short-term rental property, you're not affording them the same expectation because you're not requiring them. Or if there was only 6 of them, it wouldn't be an inspectable property. So I can appreciate the not wanting to over-regulate, but, and again, I think I said this at the very first meeting, I'm a strong proponent of any time you're going to put a living soul in an unfamiliar area where they're resting their head, they should be able to do so with a level of comfort that at least there's been some safeguards and some measures put into place to ensure their safety in the event of an emergency.
One thing I would add is that when we do inspections, yes, it's to make sure that the building is safe for everybody to get out in the event of an emergency. That's the primary goal. One of the bigger parts of it that we spend more time on is the preventing of emergencies. So if we were to go into some of these places and say, hey, don't keep your propane tank in the closet, keep it outside in your shed, that prevents an emergency. So if you do say, hey, we want inspections as part of this process, we go in there once a year, and the first time we educate the building owner on this is the safe practices, here's a fact sheet of things, do's and don'ts. Then you go back every year, it's more just a quick refresher. Nothing's changed in the building, everything's good, and you've prevented emergencies. Nobody's burned their short-term rental property down. Some of these beach communities can be tight. You didn't burn your neighbor's house down. Everything's safe on our our world on the fire side.
Would you expect, when you do your inspections, and I appreciate what you're saying, and the two questions I would have is, should there be a fee to that? And the second question, more importantly, is, where would you delineate a short-term rental for 3 days, 7 days, 30 days, a year? So should we,
I can answer both of those questions for you. The town has an established fee structure per their ordinance.
Okay.
So it would be based on the occupancy and square footage. So
Okay.
that's already been established on our end. And I'll speak for the office as a whole. I don't think it's up to us to determine your definition of a short-term rental, whether it's 1 day, 3 day, or 30 days. I think if you're going to be, and I'm going to use the term, in the business of a short-term rental, we inspect the hotels annually.
Right.
So I don't think it's necessary for us to come in if you're renting for 3 days, at the end of the third day to come and do another inspection. We don't do that for the other businesses. So I think it would be on an annual basis, unless, of course, there was a complaint or there was other reason for us to have to come in and do that. But I think that
my question was what if obviously in your business is doing short-term rentals, the inspection annually is a good idea. The question is, what would you, in your mind, would delineate that, whether it be somebody who's renting it weekly, monthly, or annually? So would you expect, because somebody's advertising their home for sale, academic rental, which is 8 months, 9 months, should that require an inspection, or should it, or what, why would that be different than somebody who's only there for a week or 2 weeks or 2 days?
So the fire code doesn't answer that question the way you're asking it. The only difference it tells us is the difference between transient and non-transient, which is 30 days.
Okay.
we still treat a hotel as a hotel, regardless of how many days you stay there.
So there is definition for transient then.
I guess that was going to be my question. So in the IF code, there is a definition of STRs or just a definition of transient?
Transient.
Okay.
The term short-term rental doesn't come up.
Okay.
I know because I've tried using the find the phrase in there. Yeah.
And I think it goes back to what I was trying to explain the first time. It's not up to us to make that definition. Whatever the town decides is the definition of a short-term rental, then we'll apply the code accordingly.
But the current code, the fire code is 30 days. Transit, it decides what transient is, 30 days. So
it defines the word transient as up to 30 days.
Correct.
But it depends on what you're using the building for actual use. So if you rent your home out, if you rent a room out to somebody, you wouldn't be seeing us under the fire code unless you're renting out your single family to 7 people or more. Then we would be able to enforce the fire code there, which we haven't historically done. Quite honestly, until we really dove into the code today, we're like, there are some exceptions in there, but how do they apply? We have to inquire with the state.
And I think that's why municipalities, specifically with regard to our office, fire marshal's offices, haven't touched this because there's a lot of ambiguity in terms of what's the definition of it. So, the one thing I do want to add, and what Paula mentioned earlier, with any sort of registration and developing a database, that is truly a huge problem for us. And it's not just with short-term rentals, but historically with property owners in general, whether it be commercial or whatnot, absentee landlords, having a point of contact in the event of an emergency, because there is, at 2 o'clock in the morning, if you're, and we're talking about short-term rentals, if we're at a property where there's a whatever issue, and you don't have an on-site person, and it's owned by an LLC out of New York, it's very difficult for us to mitigate an issue or have points of contact. So that would be a benefit of some sort of a registration to develop it. Who owns it? Who's our point of contact?
And if it's after 5 o'clock, they're not gonna wanna answer anyway.
Well, I won't comment on that, but.
Or 5 in the morning, I should say. But no, and it's probably good that maybe all rentals should have should be a point of contact for. I mean, that's an issue we have, Black Point too. We talked about that before. If something happens in our neighborhood, 600 homes, we still today don't have a complete database. We're getting closer, but we're not there.
So, Bill and Eric, a question about the IF code. So the renting to 7 people, greater than 7 people or more. So how does that work in reality, in practice? How do you know that? I guess is my question.
We'll give you an example.
Okay.
We kind of did I don't want to say straw poll, but we just did a generic search of short-term rentals within the town. And currently there are 38 short-term rentals advertised, quote unquote, of renting to more than 7 people. So with that, and Eric took some initiative, tried to do some of the property owners' information. So we would identify this database in 7-Eleven. Right, per the Connecticut Fire Code, your property is listed under whatever the verbiage is, and like to schedule an inspection and comply with life safety code, fire safety. And then it would just be a matter of having a dialogue and then setting up an appointment. Anybody similar to what we do to all inspectable properties within the town.
So another way to use the platform.
Correct.
That you can use the platform.
But that's just one way of doing it.
That's helpful. Thank you. Well, that's very helpful. Thanks so much, guys. For any other questions for Eric or Bill?
When you mentioned that we have a pricing or a fee already, what would that be, say, for the average house, 2,000 square foot home?
2,000, and please don't quote.
Yeah, it's average.
I believe it's under 3,000 square feet is $60.
Okay, so it's not onerous.
Yeah, so it's very nominal in terms of what we're talking. I think from 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, I think it goes up to $120.
Okay, this is nominal.
Yeah, it's
right.
Certainly.
I just don't want to leave with the idea of people thinking that it was a huge number. Because I find that very reasonable.
And that's a recent development in our town. Bill, you guys created that
We're one of the few
system.
towns that didn't do that.
Right. So finally, a couple of years ago, previous administration got that done. Right. Great.
So a question comes to mind, if it's $60 to come in and do that, and there's a permit fee for short-term rentals, does the permit fee cover that, or does the permit fee
The
go
permit fee
somewhere
would be
else
separate.
and you pay the $60?
Yes, and it would be separate, and that's the system I've seen in all of these regulations.
Right.
So fire marshal and all set that. Just as if there's a building code inspection that's also necessary, that's also set by building officials. And those are separate fees from what is considered an administrative fee for the permit generally.
What does that mean?
So that administrative fee is, you set up an office or office within zoning or something and we've seen everything from de minimis amount to the recent Preston hiking of that fee to $500, I believe. $500. So.
You might pick out 38 people.
Yeah, I went on to Airbnb and I
7 or
just...
more by going on the computer. It doesn't seem like there'd be a large administrative fee for 38 people times whatever it is. I mean, I think those are the questions
Yeah,
we
no,
end up getting.
yes.
It would be 19,000 if it was 500.
Yeah, I mean,
but if we were to do, if we had 200, if we currently have 200 that we know of, Airbnb rentals in total, whether they rent to one person or 10 people, 200, at $60, okay, so you're talking, $12,000.
Yeah, it's not.
Is that going to, does that offset?
Yeah,
does that offset the cost of, at some point, where would the break point where you would need additional labor? There's only 200 working days in the year.
Right.
So I would basically be doing one a day. I know they take maybe half hour.
Well, I think ideally,
and then the paperwork.
it's a matter of doing more than one want to dance.
No, I understand that.
You're absolutely right.
Right.
You have to revisit your schedule of fees,
So-
perhaps.
Right. It was just,
Yeah, no,
some
that's-
consideration,
yeah,
that
definitely.
$60 is so nominal, that.
I just brought it up because that's
No,
going
so-
to be a question.
Yeah, no question.
Well,
No,
when we
but-
get to the issue
You
of,
pay for a zone,
right,
you pay for a building.
I know, no, it begins to add up and become onerous.
It's a legitimate item now. Fire safety is just, one of the supreme things, and I thought, the fire marshal made an excellent point, when somebody writes something, they should go and put their head in the pillow. I thought that was very nicely said.
Thanks.
I believe that wholeheartedly too, so unfortunately I have to go to, we've been to our fair share, and most recently in this town where we've had fatalities and fire-related incidents that could have been prevented by working smoke detectors. So, something as simple as a 20-minute walk through the property to make sure that all the smokes are up, to me that's not a huge inconvenience, regardless of which direction we go.
Well, thanks so much, and thanks for your
Anything else?
patience. That's it, I think. Thanks so much for your patience. Right. Yeah.
Do you have the audience?
I guess you can.
If you have a question, yeah. One sec, gentlemen.
Yeah.
I think a
We have a
resident, your name?
Kayla.
I'm sorry?
Kayla Rosenberg.
Just for the record.
Yeah.
Where do you live?
Norwich, Connecticut. My question was that, do you think that if you're inspecting more of these properties as they start popping up with regulations and permitting, if that were to happen, and you're inspecting more of them, do you think that would actually decrease the incidence of fires within the town because you're inspecting more properties overall?
Well, as I just mentioned, I think if I don't know that there's a specific way that we can quantify numbers because you can't predict you can't predict that kind of an event. But I can tell you that if we go into 100 properties and we find 20 of them that didn't have a functioning smoke detector, we potentially saved 20 lives. So whether or not we did or didn't, the potential exists. But when you're not going in there, you don't know. You don't know that. And for me, and as Eric indicated earlier, there's an educational component to that, where we're not just looking at that, but we're also going to make those recommendations of, maybe you shouldn't have 5 extension cords plugged into daisy chain or something to that effect, something that is going to prevent something. But to say how many or whether or not we're going to decrease that,
I'm not asking for a specific number, more so just do you think it would be general?
I think the short answer is yes. Then I think if we're going to go into these homes and we're going to find these property and we're going to find these problems or potential problems, then I think most certainly it's going to have a direct impact on their safety. That's why the code's put into place.
Thank you. That was a good question. Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, have a great night.
Thanks a lot. All right. Have a good evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, do you think we should just, I think we can and then just share our draft. Okay, all right. I think we're actually going to try, Gary, I think good time to maybe begin to wrap up. I know we didn't get to question 2 completely, but we think if we share our of course you're here if we need to make copies of anything else, but share with each other our answers to the questions, that will, I think, also speed up our discussion of question 2 as well. I mean, this another reason why this was particularly tricky to accomplish this evening, this discussion, was because no one had seen anyone else's, writing, so we were trying to just wing it here. So, okay, so we'll do that. We'll share those.
There's one for each.
Okay, yeah, let's do one at a time. Okay, so let's see, one from Paul. Let's see.
I've got one.
Okay. This one is Paul.
Or maybe just give them the book.
Yes,
and
okay.
you can
Yeah, so
distribute
put them online.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
Or we could, or you can
throw
take
that
them.
at you.
I'll probably just take them tonight. Okay, so and Reggie, thanks for your for getting the fire marshal's yes ready set for us. also scheduling future meetings. You know, again, once we do come up with our final recommendations, we will have to have a public hearing, which we're required to do by our charge ahead of our final recommendations. We happen to have had 2 public hearings initially because we wanted to give as much opportunity to the public at that point, and especially with the blooming and so forth. And some of the long-term, I'm trying to come up with some long-term dates here too for giving us, you know, I'm open to, like, give me a date at which you think we need to just say, okay, we've discussed enough, we've heard enough, let's get those recommendations, final ones, written. So what would, in your mind, assuming we have all the members assembled at next meeting, because we're still missing 1 or 2, what would that date be? What would be realistic?
I was going to say December 7th, but that's a Saturday. Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th.
I think we need one more meeting at least to hash out our...
This was an excellent meeting. This was
Yes.
really, the last 2 meetings we've actually
Yes.
had very meaningful
Yes.
discussion after a year.
It's not easy. It is
Right.
not easy, and we have volumes of information and so many difficult issues. I agree with you, John.
I thought tonight with the fire marshal too,
Yes.
totally changed my view on that subject. What
Well-
he said made a lot of sense, at least for that point of
Yes.
view. So I think these kind of open discussions, and even though we may differ all on different points,
Sure.
it brings a lot to the table. And this is one of the last 2 have really been
Yes.
enlightening to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going to take the report that we put out for the selectmen in, what was it, April or May?
Yes, we did that in April ahead of where the...
You're going to say, we're going to talk one more meeting and we're going to add to that report?
Yeah, we're just
going to take that report and throw it out?
No, because it's, I mean, pretty much, because I've read it now 100 times, I think there's plenty of valid information still in that report. Very, very, very little has changed, just that we were walking on eggshells waiting for WIBI, you know, to be decided. So, but it sets the stage well for whatever we do decide. So that stays. We don't worry about it. It was an interim report. So what we do now is final recommendations in a shortened version, because we don't have to give all the lead up to, oh, here's all the literature, and here's the this analysis, and Granicus this, and Granicus that, right? So we just have to say, given everything we've looked at in that report, given everything we've heard so far, and have continued to hear, because, for example, tonight, whatever, this is what we think. So it would be a very shortened. It's not going to be long. It wouldn't have a million exhibits, because we have all our exhibits in that document, right? But the 20-plus pages of report, the 80-plus pages of document. Yeah, so it would just be, the key for us now is trying to agree where we can, and I don't know, and here's the question for next meeting for sure, I really think this is important. If we don't agree on everything, but maybe 2 people think this or 2 people think that, you don't want to get into the weeds on every scenario. But if there's reasonable, points made, even though we're not all in consensus, I think we should still present that. I think we can't, depending on what the topic is. But I said this before, we may very well get to consensus. But if we don't, I don't want to leave out voices and opinions on things where they're valid and they're backed up by certain evidence. And that's part of the reason of going through this too. Not only to help come to consensus, but also if there are differences, why you have those differences. Gary pointed out to me, in his work as a litigator, that 2 people can look at the same evidence. I know this is a lawyer as well, but 2 people can look at the same evidence and come to different policy conclusions. So
We could write a majority report and a minority report.
exactly.
Right. I think we're going to have to.
And I think that may come to pass. And then, and remember, this is going to Board of Selectmen at the same time through Ann Thorlow, who is our zoning representative. they should, they've gotten a copy of this report, right? They have this, they've had it for some time now, of our interim report. They need to be on board and ready to go, because they're the other authority here that can do things besides the selectmen. And the two of them, I believe, and I hope, get together. That's my prayer, that they get together.
We may also have to, in our final recommendation, address points that why we didn't propose them. Because the Board of Selectmen are going to have questions, themselves. Hey, why don't you do this? And why don't you do that? So we may have to put some footnotes in there. We really didn't like this idea because, and we go through why we may have rejected certain things. That way, we anticipate some of their questions and say, this is why we didn't like that. That kind of thing.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So what would be our
it's
next?
Not going to be. We have to keep it fairly short.
Yeah, definitely,
Right.
because we've done the legwork leading up to this point, and we've digested Witty and.
So the Board of Selectmen is a 1 8x11 slide.
I'd say one more meeting, and now that if we can share this information and share the last documents we had when we did our draft recommendations. We kind of did this a little bit in reverse, but that's okay. We realized that we needed to delve into existing evidence a little more. So with these 2 documents from everybody, I think at this point we read those, digest them, have a kind of final meeting, and maybe we can say that this is the meeting that you've got to kind of make your decision.
I think we're wrapping up.
Yeah, that's
No,
good.
not right now. I'm saying
Yes.
pretty soon.
That's a little. Okay. Wrap it up, Ann. Okay. So let's look at, Thanksgiving is our next week, right? Thanksgiving week. Would you say that, who's there from December? You had a December
I'm not
date.
available.
You're not
Good,
available.
let's do it December. At all?
At
The whole
all?
month?
The whole month. Too busy.
Doing a short-term rental in Barbados? Well, they love it there, that's why.
Okay.
Yeah, over.
Not even at the beginning?
Crazy? I thought next week, yeah.
Well, that brings us to January.
Sure, January's good.
Okay.
It's just my work schedule.
Okay.
December's
Yeah.
terrible.
It's not easy for on a lot of levels for all of us. Okay. So it's Monday evening.
January 6th.
January 6th, is that first
January
Monday?
6th is the only Monday I'm available in January.
Okay.
If I need to be
Well, we're doing that then.
Sounds good.
John.
No, I'm just saying that's the only one that's okay.
Okay, we do that. And I think, certainly and maybe before that meeting, I know you're busy in December, but I'll hound you.
Yes, I'm sorry.
And before that meeting in January, maybe we can have something, if we're not here in the other room, some board we can use to kind of go through where we're agreeing, where we're not agreeing, and
Correct.
And highlight the main issues. We cannot get in every weed, and we've been through this discussion, so I won't belabor the point. We can't get on every weed, but we can give some direction. So, okay, so the 6th looks like it's it. Okay.
I think we also need to delineate where we're going to weigh in and where the zoning board should weigh in, the zoning commission. So we don't get involved in things that we shouldn't be involved in.
Yeah,
We're supposed to recommend.
that's all.
Your recommendation.
That's
Right.
all.
I think, even though our charge is to recommend to the Board of Selectmen, I would feel very comfortable recommending to the zoning commission what we feel they have to do to
Yeah.
blend the
Right.
situation together.
Right, exactly. I
There
agree.
are public hearings on both sides. Both of those commissions sort of have to happen.
Yeah.
And if any change of any kind, so.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to figure out the mechanics of how every
gonna draft zoning regulations, we,
Right,
yeah,
that's
we
all, right,
discussed that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
We're not gonna draft an ordinance,
No, no.
even though that might be the approach. We're not gonna draft zoning regulations,
No.
even though that may be the approach. But the content
Correct.
and the coverage, the general idea, and keeping things simple, just addressing these points, not those points, that kind of
We
thing.
think zoning should look at this. We think
Yeah.
that's the benefit.
Yes, exactly. Okay. So that would be our meeting, and then, we can soon thereafter, after that meeting, just write the recommendations, and then, and as that's happening, as that writing is happening, set that public hearing. So we can give a little time for the public to read that 5-page thing of recommendations, the follow-up to the interim report, right? And then we hear that public information, and then if we have any changes, if people are saying things that they had not said previously, or, saying them louder or whatever, and we need to address something, that's the time to do that and make any final change. Sort of the way you do a budget, where you present the budget to the public and act accordingly, right? Proceed accordingly. Okay, so that's good. So I can kind of in my mind have almost a date, maybe by the end of January, that we would have the public hearing, right?
In time for my birthday.
Oh, okay.
We'll bring cake, people will come.
Right. And we need so what we would do at that January 6th meeting, we would set the date for the public hearing. So that's that, and then there's notice through your office, and notice in the paper and so forth.
Yep.
I think, is it like 10 to 15 days? I can't remember the exact days.
It's like, 10 to 15.
From us setting that date to then having it.
All right, so we picked the next date already?
Yes,
Yeah.
January 6th.
Okay.
January 6th.
We're good?
And we'll share. I'll pass this out. This is just, and I know I play devil's advocate a little bit, but it's okay.
That's a good thing.
Okay, and
I wasn't prepared this evening, but I'll try to come up with a negative on short-term rental.
That's all right.
Very difficult, Paul.
Only if they
All right.
get a positive.
Say again?
All right.
I said only they get a positive.
Oh, if you look at the record,
I think
there's
positive.
a lot of positives on my side.
I think positive.
I present them all the time, both sides.
Yeah.
You should look at the record.
Okay. So, any last points? Any committee member wants to say anything? Any other questions from the public? Thanks for your patience. It's not easy. Okay. Thanks so much. Okay, so I guess with that, we will adjourn. Okay, we don't need a motion. We'll just
Thank you. Excellent meeting.